Hello and welcome. Jodi, Wellman, Peter Croft, thank you guys for joining me. We have the US and the UK, both sunny locations right now, a little bit chilly on all fronts, including Ireland here today. But this has been great because I'm conscious that you guys haven't met before, as this is quite exciting as well, because the beauty of different stories, different backgrounds, different geos, different life stories. So this is going to be great to connect the dots between you guys and see what's also interesting from a leadership perspective, as well as a sports perspective, as well as a career opportunities. So, Jodi, let's start with you first. Connect the dots for me from you, from where you started to where you are today.
Okay, the circuitous path, right. My career began in the fitness business, and this is back in the 1900s, right? And my first job out of college was as a personal trainer when personal training was new. So it was sort of this inaugural thing. And then working in, health clubs, I ended up growing and keeping the ambition about, oh, but I could do that thing next, and I could manage a club next, and I could manage a district next, and I could do this. And until my last job after 17 years in the fitness industry was as a senior vice president of operations for a national health club chain. And that was a great ride until it wasn't, until I realized I want something different. I want something more. And I didn't know what to do though. So, I can tell you about some stories of woe because it's always fun to talk about when you're stuck and you don't know what to do. And I was for a couple of years totally faking it that I was loving it, but not loving it and trying to find my next thing, which I did find. And I transitioned into leadership development and coaching, like executive coaching.
Right.
And I did that for about 10 years and had a great business partner. And we would do great work working with people and helping them to, make the most of their leadership and their teams and their businesses. And then in the constant evolution of life, I found myself kind of itching with this thing of, I've always been interested in the topic of carpe diem, the seize the day, the idea that life is short. So let's get on with it. But I didn't know how to talk about that and not weird people out. And I finally went back to school for my master's in applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And I studied this topic of memento mori, remembering we must die, as a motivator to live more fully. And now I shifted my business pretty much entirely from the leadership development now into doing keynotes and workshops to help teams and people live life more fully because, yeah, unfortunately, like we're all ticking time bombs. So the dots connecting, I think for me, it's always been this idea about wanting to help us be these better versions of ourselves, right? Like in the fitness business, whether it's physically feeling, full of vitality and energy, and then in leadership, either making it not suck to work or enjoying it ideally. And then at this point, how do you have an astonishingly alive life? So that's what I'm doing now by writing and speaking.
I love it. And your book has really helped me the last few months. When I came back from the US early in the summer, I ended up, unfortunately, at a number of funerals of people that were quite powerful in my life, right? Like when early in my life. And between reading your book, and of course, an Irish funeral takes 3 days, right? We really do celebrate life. So we really do go into the whole, this person had a fulfilled life. So the perspective kept landing. So your book just seemed to kind of come up over a number of months. So it's been powerful. So let's come back to that because I want to connect those dots even more. And Peter, there's obviously overlap here from a fitness perspective, leadership perspective, amazing career. So over to you. Connect the dots for us from your side.
Well, thank you. I mean, very similar start actually. For me, I think at 15, I was a lifeguard in a sports center and, just love this notion of sport and human growth, really. The notion of life coaching was with me really quite early on. Sports science and business degree followed that, and then moved into further operating health clubs, similar to yourself, Jodi. Back in the day in the UK, where we were still rolling out large numbers of clubs, I was doing that for this border, clubs that turned into David Lloyd and Virgin, running as fitness manager, followed by, group operations. And to your point, Jodi, you get to a point where actually, you know what, there's got to be a bit more. There's got to be a way that we can actually really affect more people or support more people. And from there, I kind of got into this notion of going beyond the UK and how do I do that? I worked in global account management for Life Fitness, one of the large equipment suppliers, and that gave me a very global approach to the world. and I very quickly started to see this notion that actually digital was a bit of a pivot point that was going to increase our efficiency and volume and our capability of connecting with more people and helping them drive that growth. So I took that on. I started trying to understand that, before most people were thinking about digital. I think spent some time in the US for 4 years, running a company there, which was all about activity tracking. We did the first one of the first activity tracking wearable activities, the Nike Plus device that fitted in the shoe, and started to work out, what does data do? Does that help? Does it not help? And how does that help people connect to their future? So, from there, maintained the effort within digital, felt that getting to the center of the club and how do you operate a facility well digitally, but more importantly, as a platform, how do you really open this notion of an ecosystem of supporting tools that really help consumers, operators just deliver more to more people. I started to realize that actually that was ultimately it was a disruptive facilitator to get to more. And my focus really has come from there onto really human-centric design. How does digital focus, and how do you design digital to really help the human get more from what they do and take experiences that they've not had in the past and deliver those in a different way. Got to the point, sold a company this year, which was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work. Moved into that high-end sort of stressful business element, which is interesting but very experiential. And that was a combination of probably 20 years of being a global citizen first, right? How do you actually develop business anywhere in the world, and what do people look like, and how do people think about health and well-being all over the world? And from there, I remain in that space right now, which is really trying to facilitate digital. I support Europe Active as their chair of the T20 group, which is their tech group, developing this operational ecosystem of supporting digital technology. And it's always got this focus of how do we get to the human at the center and not really think about this as technology, but how do we think about it from the human first? So yeah, interesting from my perspective. Spent a lot of time in the same industry, and looking forward to hopefully some more time.
This is the beauty, right? There's so many ways coming at this. I mean, we know that our passions, all of us here, is health, right? It's health in different ways. I mean, obviously, my the part of the podcast is looking at women's health, women's fitness in particular, because we need to do more. And thankfully, we're seeing loads of research finally around more women's health and so on. Now we have a long way to go. But the beauty of connecting those dots is happening, which has been phenomenal. And like Peter, when we look at the technologies and the industry and trying to literally get more women to be active, thankfully we all the technologies and the ways of making it streamlined, as well as using AI and around what experiences are great, and all of these improvements all help. And they, like, the tweaks and the opportunities are phenomenal. And we really need to push hard on figuring out how do we get the 80%, to be active, as opposed to the 20% to be active. So lots of great work to do with it. But both of you guys have been in big corporates, right? Both of you have gone from startups, founding, right up to big corporate, as well as going back into coaching. So Jodi, for your perspective, to give us a little bit of the context between the differences, you think, between the one-to-one coaching aspect, but also then the big corporate, where you're still one-to-one, but yet it's a big team at the same time, because you're back in full circle now. You're gone back into big corporations, speaking to groups and teams and training them on thinking, positive psychology.
Yeah. The touch points are similar but different, and different enough that I think it's stark, like even just to define, leadership versus coaching. And, actually one of the programs I like to talk about is like leading more like a coach. So this idea that if you believe that people are, naturally creative and resourceful and can figure some things out on their own if they were asked the right questions, how can that bring the best out of them? And that can be true from the space. So when I'm on a stage and I'm talking to people about these ideas about living life fully, It's about getting people thinking, what would make you feel more alive? Or to a team, like, when were you feeling like you were the most full of vitality as a team? Getting them to come to their own conclusions is the answer, rather than just being told what to do, because, people support that which they create. So I tie it together in ways where, like, even as a leader, I think oftentimes, especially as a newer leader, there's this misnomer that you need to have all the answers, which is kind of funny, because that's like the trap where you think you have to, and then you're never going to have all the answers. So you're always failing, versus, like, what if you had really great questions? At some point you actually have to answer a real question, but you got to know something. But, in concept, it's like, how do I help ask a really powerful question to get the best out of you, and have you be the one with autonomy, because autonomy is one of the biggest building blocks of motivation, as we know. So yeah, there's this, that, I think that the idea about coaching, the idea about encouraging, can be woven into even just the smallest interaction, even within a big corporate environment where it doesn't necessarily seem coachy. It could seem quite managey, but you could have both.
I think this is quite interesting. And Peter, I want to pick your brain of this one. So this way of working, and I agree with you, autonomy is phenomenally important and is a motivator and so on. It's not, though, how a lot of businesses operate. And we still operate in hierarchical situations in many ways. And I think as we transition into having more gender balanced teams, I think we get more of that, but we're still not anywhere close to it. Peter, what are you seeing? Because reality is, we still have hierarchical structures in many places. We still have a lot of KPIs. We still have a lot of, like, here's your deadlines, here's the goals, let's hit them. And we've lots of people moving around, even though we do know that there is a shift towards people following their purpose and looking for companies to be part of the purpose and so on. But give me some context from your side of things as a leader who's been across the world as well as across industry.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've worked in big corporate and mid-size, large startup to scale up to complete entrepreneurial environments. And I think the challenge with big corporate is it's predominantly about scale and has to be, right? Typically you're trying to scale a large opportunity, but that opportunity is established. So, and as a result, is with a lot of people, making sure that everyone is aligned is actually the real skill. Bringing the best out of people, clearly important, but making sure everyone is heading in pretty much the same direction is fundamental. That's less so in that sort of startup to scale up phase, where you have much more conversation, much more interaction with, the hierarchy. You're able to follow just through conversation without necessarily forcing process into place. And as a result of that, you get a lot more autonomy, and you're often given a lot more autonomy to drive. And that's why we see smaller business move faster, often get to a point where they're trying to scale. And that's the point that maybe they get acquired or they merge, or maybe they have an investment that really takes them to that next level. But often that next level then brings in process. So, I think if you're in a visionary, inventive part of a large organization, then autonomy is a critical piece of the puzzle, because you're ultimately trying to create the future. If you're in mainstream part of the company, often that autonomy is squashed a wee bit. And I think that makes a big difference between the two companies. Which is better? That's a tough question, and it depends where you are often on the growth curve, in my view. If you're in the growth curve and everything you're doing as an organization, as a team, in a big group is driving for this growth, that's a super exciting place to be. In a smaller company, if you're reinventing and creating that first piece of established kind of growth, that's also super exciting. But it comes with a lot of stress, often around the bank account, which can create great challenges.
Peter, as the industries are changing and as the leadership structures are changing, and then we know DEI, and I think DEI is becoming nearly a bad word in some parts of the world, unfortunately. But as we look at the balance and that's happening, and there's growth happening at strategy level, at board level, as well as executive level, and there's a natural trend now, thankfully, of more balance and diversity at that. What are you seeing, or what do you see as the difference and benefits, pros, cons, threats, opportunities? Because we want to connect the dots between, if you want to have a product or a service that serves a population, that representation of the population needs to be at that strategy level. I mean, and that's where it's been proven to be the most effective for revenue as well as for operations and so on. We're not there in most parts of industry, in most parts of any industry, to be honest, but we're getting there. So what's your thoughts, opportunities, threats, challenges, pros, cons?
Yeah, I think, look, we're in a hugely disruptive world right now. And as an industry, I think we struggle with that. We don't have a disruptive nature. Oftentimes we like the status quo. We're seeing a lot of consolidation, a lot of simplification, whereas actually, consumer disruption is what's needed, right? If we're going to make a difference, if we're going to change the demographic, if we're going to change access to larger volumes of people, if we're going to be more relevant to a whole life active well-being, then we need to be very disruptive. Because ultimately our business is still very focused on running facilities and doing those hugely efficiently to make money, ultimately. And we've shifted to where we need to be with the human, right? We really need to be serving the human. So that disruption is something that maybe we need to learn to embrace more as an industry.
It's interesting. Gender balance seems to be disruption. It's just interesting. I think you're absolutely right. It is a disruption. But it's interesting. Joe, did you see a difference when you're looking at teams and they're, embracing of what you're talking about? Is there a gender difference?
There can be. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's uniform. Like I would want a broad paintbrush across all of them. But I would say that there is, because we know that the typical traits, if you're going to just talk typically, around teams that maybe have more females can be more collaborative in different ways, and or leaders can also be more interested in the human aspect if they are presenting as female in this sort of traditional way of caring more about what's going on with you and bringing it back down to the kind of the human side of it. It's like we all have a big job to do. And I love, Peter, your points about like, yes, the alignment is needed. And I do agree that in larger environments, we may not have what's the luxury of tapping into each individual's strengths, et cetera. And yet traditionally, in my experience, it can be more of a female-led environment where there is more of a natural inclination to stop and say, hey, I noticed that, Yolanda, you're particularly creative. Are you feeling like you're getting to be as creative as you need to be at work in order to feel fulfilled so that you're not looking on Indeed.com tonight and looking to leave? So I will say that there, in my experience, there have been more instances of a desire to get to know people and make them feel like they matter. That concept of mattering is one of my favorite ones in well-being, this notion that we have to have a balance between feeling valued and adding value. And I think it's just naturally for many people, or for many women, more of a natural starting point is to provide that kind of care, to maybe appreciate people more, to care in a different way that might not occur sometimes to another gender, for example.
On that, interesting. I find that, and I know, Peter, you've got a daughter, and I appreciate, I don't want to pull in too much privacy, but when I see the phenomenon of, girl dads and dads being more involved in parenting, I see a natural shift, to your point, Jodi, around that as well, which is, I find it very fascinating. It is disruptive, where we're seeing that more of a, collaboration, also, I think more empathy, as well as just more involvement. And I think that's a changing dynamic. Peter, do you see that? Because I think it's definitely translates into the workplace as a natural, just there is a difference. And I feel like it's a positive thing all around, for male, female, young and old, in terms of the workplace, as well as inside and outside.
Yeah, I think, look, whether it's about gender, whether it's about generation, whether it's about demographic, I think you can look at it all in a very similar way. And the question maybe is, are we really serving broad swathes of the population, or are we actually a little bit sport-like? And I know, I'd love to talk a little bit about sport, because it's created a lot of, how I think about the world, and my daughters, how they think about the world. But before we go there, I think, you know, maybe our product just isn't well suited to all of those segments and all of those demographics and both genders, right? Um, and that's holding us back. So we need better representation, regardless of whether that's, at C-suite in an employed role, or whether it's a Gen Z council or a female council. There's steps that we can take that help us understand better what services we can deliver. And I think, coming back to the digital a little bit, we now have really good data that can help guide us to a much more personalized approach, where we can deliver much more sophisticated programs that suit more people. And I think that's the shift that we're really looking for. Gen Z is going to drive us in that direction, whether we like it or not, right? Consumer-driven well-being is taken a hold, and the majority of our consumers are now Gen Z millennial, right? So we have to listen. So how do we take some early steps if we can't fully get 30 to 50% of our boards represented by females? Then at least let's have a council that advises us and can help identify some of those areas where, that fundamentally doesn't serve the population. How do we introduce new solutions?
And that diversity, I think you mentioned generational aspect there. I had said that the generation, of the younger people today as well are very much aligned to purpose, right? There's no more of going into a job because it pays and spending 40 years, right? Totally like gone. You find a company that's aligned to your purpose, and you may change because your purposes and your missions and passions change with it as you age or whatever. So it is a very different scenario, because to your point now, and you both mentioned it, if we're going to work with people, we need to work at what they're passionate about and where they feel they have autonomy over what they're working on and what they're passionate about. So it's a very different way of working. From even when we started our careers, which isn't that long ago, and we're all very young. It was quite different. You do what you were told, and you just figured out you had to go up the ladder, and you had to kind of suffer your way through it in many ways and get through whatever you liked, get over it. Whatever you didn't like, and just push on and learn and absorb and be a sponge. It's a very different mentality today, where it's not, they're like, I don't need to work 50, 60 hours a week. I'm going to work when I'm paid to work, and I'm going to hopefully enjoy it. And I want to be able to see the impact. That's really hard. But it does align, Jodi, what you're talking about around that perspective of we're here for a short time, not a long time.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about this, it reminds me of an opinion that I might contradict myself. Life's complicated. So I have this, I'm curious what you both think about this. Pressure that I think exists today for our career to be the thing that delivers on fulfillment and purpose. We all want the ikigai, world's most complicated Venn diagram of, vocation, and will it pay you? And are you going to change the world? And are you going to be fulfilled forever? I don't mean to say that dismissively. What I say about this is, I think that we've over-indexed on wanting and maybe needing work to be the place to give us both pleasure and meaning. And I think that it's a recipe for potential disappointment, because work is going to be work. Like, at the end of the day, you got to do the admin stuff you don't want to do, or you got to do the hard stuff, or you got to do stuff that's going to make you uncomfortable and work with people that are annoying, and all the things that just, welcome to the work world. And I think that of course, my solution to that, which I talk about, is the idea about how do we enhance our lives outside of work, like rekindling our interests and hobbies and passions and things that give us excitement on the weekends and evenings and other times of the day, so that when we come into work, we have already filled our buckets up. We're already feeling pretty good about life, and we're feeling vitally alive. And that I would never advocate working for a job you don't love. If it's sucking your soul out, for sure, bon voyage, leave. But maybe we recalibrate our expectations about work being this delivery mechanism for the, well-being that we want in our lives. So, yeah.
I think you're right there. And I see the term family being used sometimes around work, and it gives me the ick, where I'm like, no, I can't fire my family, or I can't be hired by them, and I can't leave them and decide I might never see them again. It just doesn't work like that. So yeah. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good way of looking at it, because a job was fundamental, right? we wanted work first. Secondly, we wanted to hopefully enjoy work. And thirdly, we'd really like to be fulfilled. And then maybe they even look after our well-being as well, or give us the excitement of doing other things. But it was on the corporate to do that, right? It wasn't on us.
Yeah.
I think that's shifted significantly. And I think both females and Gen Z millennials have a very different view of the world, right? So, one of the drivers of my eldest daughter, Ella, has been to move to running her own business because that gives her the freedom she wants and desires to be herself. And, very difficult to match with your corporate, the company that you're working for, but a lot easier to match it with, actually, let me match the work that I do with the person that I am, even if the work is not wholly purposeful and wholly fulfilling, but at least it's matched to me. And over time, and I can get to more and more for, feeling better about what I do and really, fulfilling myself. And those shifts have happened. And as a result, I think corporate is much more interested in, actually, we've got to find the right people. And we've got to find people that are interested in what we do. And we've got to look after them better. We've got to give them more freedom. We've got to understand productivity and efficiency. And actually, it's, maybe 30 hours. Maybe you want to work only mornings. Maybe you want a different type of contract. But I can get more from you that way to fulfill our goals than if I just try and force you into a 40-hour week, which was, invented back in the industrial age when, what was the maximum you could physically get from somebody? Well, it was 8 hours a day with half an hour off at lunchtime, right? Yeah. So that change is so good for us because I think it also then drives freedom to be able to be healthier, to have better well-being, to think about it on a day-to-day basis, to down tools because at 2:00 in the afternoon you're tired and you're not fulfilling what you're supposed to be doing, right? And come back to it at 4:00 or get up early or whatever it is, but you work to your own direction. So we've got to be smart about that.
And it's interesting your daughter has gone out on her own as well, because I'm definitely seeing a shift to more people starting their own businesses for that reason exactly, where they can kind of own it, right, and run it and be passionate and follow what they look for or what they want. It's going to be harder to recruit in a couple of years' time for the bigger corporates because if the vast majority of people in that early 20s category now are starting their own companies, we're going to have a lack of talent coming through to the big corporates. But I said it's finding the right talent and then really progressing and supporting and nurturing that person to want to stay for different, passions as well as autonomy and so on with it. It's definitely a shift. It's definitely a shift where it's not going to be the same level of here's your job, get on with it, and you get paid, and you might get a bonus, but you might not. So we really ought to think different.
Yeah.
Jodi, when you look at the
sorry, guys, just a comment on that.
Yeah, of course.
I think that adaptation is already happening, right? So corporations are already reaching out to, independent people on Fever and other solutions, right? Actually, I need this piece of work done.
Yeah, right.
I don't need somebody who's going to do that 40 hours a week. I just need that done, right? And facilitating that is a young person's dream to a certain degree. It still gets things done and potentially can be faster, stronger, more efficient, higher volume, better quality. And you get to say, actually, that person wasn't as good. I'll move on for the next piece of contracted work that I'm looking for. And that contractual approach probably suits the human being better than these deep commitments that are expected on the one side and not fulfilled back on the other side.
You're so right there. It's one of the reasons why with the collective we're doing fractional work, because to your point is I can then work with more than one company as well, right? It gives me autonomy to look at 3 or 4 different companies that I like to work with, that I like doing something, and gives me a bit of diversity. At the same time, the company's like, I don't need someone for 5 days a week for this project or role. I don't need them full time. I don't know if it's 2 days a week or 3 days a week or it's 6 months or, well, we just, start with that kind of project phase. So you're dead right. I think it's going to be much more flexibility for the company, but then there's a lot more management of people. And that goes back to that, management of people is possibly the hardest thing we all do, right? As leaders, it's never going to be easy. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of empathy. It takes a lot of asking questions. And Jodi mentioned like being curious. What's the person thinking and feeling, and are they, being fulfilled? Do they feel they have autonomy? So there's a lot of work in that. But it's productive work, hopefully.
And Jodi, I know you have a comment on that, but just, it actually, that approach helps us disrupt and manage disruption way better. Change is, more relevant now than it's ever been. And that mechanism allows us to do it if we're good at it. And that's the piece I think we're struggling with, really. Are big companies ready? And the answer is no, because we're not human centric in the way we think about employment or people or what they want to do. Sorry, Jodi, I know you had some comments there, but I wanted to finish
No,
up.
I love what you're saying. And you're making me think too about how I think so much of the glitch happens when it may not even be because someone just inherently doesn't care. It could be, I see this a lot, where it's that we're not equipped to handle the conflict that naturally is going to emerge when I may need to give you feedback that you actually kind of underdelivered on that presentation, or that, if I ask you, how are you doing? I don't know how to handle it if you tell me you're not doing well, because I don't want to, that's messy. And so how about I just kind of keep a distant approach, and I'll be cordial and I will be, polite, and we'll have our one-on-ones, which won't talk about, how work's going. It's going to be talking about what is happening. And that way get to tick the boxes and we're good, but I don't have to get into anything that might be murky and that might be awkward and that would require that, the discomfort of a difficult conversation. So that lack of willingness to go there, that managerial courage, I know Brene Brown calls it, is just one of those things I think that is, it's kind of glaring, right? Like that holds us back.
This brings me on something that's very topical for me right now is, you said, knowing what conversations to have and being okay with the conversation. And conflict is definitely one, for sure. And you called it out rightly there. If someone's not having a good time, be it at work or personally, I mean, you bring it to work. What do you do with it? None of us are trained, right? There's only a certain portion of the population who are trained to deal with this. Most managers and leaders aren't. We've come leaders because we've been good at something, and then we've ended up growing a team because we got more responsibilities and more, more scale and more KPIs. So we naturally grow that way. But the challenge with that is that we're not equipped for these conversations, and now we have, thankfully, much more openness around mental health. We also have now much more openness around stages of life. I mean, Jodi, I think we talked about this last time we talked. When I turned 40, my algorithm on social media changed overnight. I'm getting research up menopause. I'm like, jeepers, what just happened? Literally overnight, the algorithm changed. And all of a sudden, I'm getting bombarded. The good news is lots of strength training, but it just means that we're going to have more conversations around the stages of life. And likewise, are we trained? I mean, Peter, you're going to have women on your team coming to you going, okay, I've just started HRT. Here's my symptoms. And you'll be like, what do I do with this? Like, do you have the conversation? How do you have the conversation? It goes back to that flexibility. I think we got to open up a conversation of how do we have these conversations and all these scenarios of things that could be said and going, well, what's the right thing to say or do here? And then, of course, we have legal aspects as well as just the human aspect. We have to be very careful. Reality is we have so many things we can do and so many things we can't do. Peter, how are you feeling about having the conversations around menstrual cycles and menopause and all the other natural conflicts that happen in business?
So it's interesting, actually. My daughters probably will back me up on this. Is driving in the car, going to football games. They're both really good football players, and I talked about the cycle and when luteinizing hormone would kick in, and when your ligaments might be a little bit less strong, and actually maybe is today is a day to back off and today is a day to push forward. So I think at the end of the day it's just physiology, so it really doesn't matter whether it's about gender or otherwise. We need to know these things as sports coaches, so why not as coaches in the workplace?
But this is beautiful because, to your point, sport is important. A good example here. If we can get normalized conversation around it for sport, then it's easier to bring it into the workplace because it's just normalized. You said physiology and neuroscience, and then we have lots of data to go with it. And then, as we know, over 90% of women who are leaders would recognize themselves as being an athlete at some point. So the sport continuum is really, 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 really strong. So the chances of girls that are playing sport when they're young and being leaders is a very strong connection. So yeah, I'm a massive believer we get every kid into some sport. It doesn't actually matter what sport it is, but some sport, be it individual or team, but that sport aspect is what you learn. the usual communication, ability to work together, ability to be flexible, resilience, to fail and start again, to all that stuff is just naturally right what you learn in sport. And it's a really good point because I do believe that we can connect the dots between sport and leadership. It's a very, very strong chain there. It's not hard to make that connection. Peter, you mentioned there around coaching, and I know you're a coach. And I do think that there's a few coaches are definitely ahead of their game. It sounds like you're ahead of the game of having those conversations with your daughters. And no doubt the first ones weren't comfortable, but you got there over time. Should we be sending leaders in the business world into coaching world and being like, here's what the conversations are. Here's some basic science to go with the conversation.
For sure, right? And it can be sport, but it can be, an orchestra or a choir. You still get a lot of the team effect. You still get the creativity. Sport clearly teaches us an awful lot, both whether you're a captain, whether you're somebody who's in midfield delivering all of the passes that create the goals, or whether you're a coach on the sideline. It delivers so much. Often it creates opportunity to understand adversity and how are you going to handle that? How do you handle that as a group? How do you get through that? And disappointment, I'm on the sideline because I got an injury. All of those things teach us a great deal, which really help in leadership. But I would bring in another point. I think sport is only one of the spheres. I think, what we're beginning to see is, how do we think about embodiment as well, and maybe the disciplines around embodiment, or the notion of flow, that's not competitive, but is still active and still mental and creative, spiritual even. How do we become experts in those? How do we acknowledge that and think about it in a corporate environment, but also within our own industry? How do we take this notion of longevity and connect it to other things that don't necessarily need competitive motivation to be successful? I think a lot of what we've built so far in facilities is somewhat connected to sport or intensity or competition. And actually, there's a lot more to it than that. How do we expand? And I think that expansion will give us a lot more connection to newer populations, whichever segment or gender that they come from. Just opening up that dynamic.
That's a really good point. I was thinking back to something that happened years and years back at Apple in a really particular stressful time for one of the teams that I was supporting. And actually the manager brought in adult coloring books. And it was step back from the desk, step back from, as you said, the madness that is typical work life. And people really got into just literally going through, as you said, basics and coloring. And it was so simple, and it was 15, 20 minutes type of thing. But completely allowed them to switch off. And as you said, reset, but be creative. And yeah, I completely agree. And my natural default is to go to sport because when I get mad, that's where I go. I go get active because I hit a ball against a wall pretty aggressively for 20 minutes. Anger is gone. It really does help bring down the frustration, testosterone levels. So you're right. There's more than sport. There's different activities there that we should be bringing into that. Jodi, when you look at your book and what you kind of obviously walked through with it, give us some more context there, because I want to make sure that the lessons that you're teaching, in big corporates and big leaders and big teams, that we get that lessons. What are those snippets for us that people should be resonating today in order to be able to use tomorrow?
Oh, cool question. I talk a lot in You Only Die Once about, of course, not just this idea that we'd like to live longer and maybe do great things in our career for longer, but this notion about living wider and deeper. And so the width is associated with the dimension of vitality. That's the fun stuff we do, the experiences, the pleasure. And it could be on the team, when you have fun and you're joking around, or you're out doing your potluck dinner, or doing the fun things. And then the depth has to do with meaning and purpose. So more of the substantial stuff. It also has to do with like deeper, meaningful connection, relationships, maybe connection to something bigger than who you are, and looking maybe at the greater picture of what's the purpose of what you're doing on your team larger. And so I think that, one way to look at it is to say, okay, how am I doing? How wide am I feeling right now in my life? Like both in and out of work, with vitality, am I having enough fun? And how deep am I? do I have enough meaning? And where most of us are able to self-identify, research is clear, we're pretty able to kind of put a, 1 to 10 number on both of those. And in my research, most people will fall into this quadrant called meaningfully bored, which means that they have enough meaning to feel like, no, I'm pretty good. Like I've got meaning. I don't know, I'm raising kids, or I've got a meaningful job, or whatever it is. But they are feeling like they're lacking in vitality. And that is back to that kind of campaign in a way of saying, well, what are you doing that is giving you that sense of participating in your life? Because I think for many adults, we transition into this responsible phase where now I'm working. We somehow let go of the intramural basketball thing you used to do, or the painting, or the hobby, or we fell off the wagon even with some of our social opportunities. And I think that then we're starting to lead these lives that are lacking in vitality. And the need for novelty based on psychological science is so crucial to keep us feeling, it was actually a component in sort of early self-determination theory days about what it takes to help us contribute. And this feeling, if we're not actually trying new things and doing new things, and whether it's with a team or whether it's individually, I think those are the things when we start to feel like we're becoming these highly functioning zombies. And then we start to feel like, now I'm just waiting to die. Like what? Like it's just basically one week after the other, glazed over. And so I think it's an opportunity to go, do you think you need more width with vitality? And what would that take? Because no one's going to do it for you. It's no leader's job. I mean, I talk with leaders about how, you create the environment where it's possible for people to have more fun and enjoyment and experiences and be more social together, but also mostly about giving them time to do it outside of work and talking about it in work, holding people accountable to the things to say, wow, did you do that whitewater rafting trip that you've been talking about? Hey, you want to do it this summer? Okay, show us the pictures when you get back. Like teams that are interested in the vitality of other team members' lives, they tend to thrive. So it might be about taking a pulse check. Are you feeling wide enough with vitality? Are you feeling deep enough with meaning? And if not, what's one thing you could do to help feel a little more alive starting today? Because it's usually the small stuff that makes the difference.
And that brings us back, doesn't it, to what you were saying earlier on around work not being the purpose of your life. We need to be, it's balance. Yeah. It's creating more than just work being what your purpose is.
Yes.
I think, Peter, do we struggle with that a little bit in the industry of fitness and sport? Because a lot of us are so passionate about being active, and we started into a career in sport and fitness because we enjoyed being physically fit and sporty. I wonder, are we our own worst enemies a little bit if we started from that journey, from that side of the coin?
I wouldn't say worst enemies, because I think we deliver a success within a segment of like-minded people, right? But I think that like-minded piece is important. We do probably appeal to sporty people by our nature, and we're not really connecting with those that don't necessarily think about that. So, particularly with some of the stats on, the type of experiences that our kids are having at school, that the amount of experience is really low, right? So the notion of, I just wouldn't know what to do. I don't have the cognitive development to go and say, you know what, I'm going to do whitewater rafting this year. It's such a big leap to even consider it, that it's beyond it. Whether, for me, it would be, yeah, sure, let's have, I've done it before. I know what it's like. Let's have a go. And I think, we need to bring that level of experience up, and it does take leaders to do that. And maybe that's a good way to think about it as a corporate, but certainly as our industry. So when I was a fitness manager, I set up a club called the Easily Led Club. It was kind of tongue in cheek, but I used to take people on these adventures, in essence, whether it was climbing a mountain or doing whitewater rafting or sailing or whatever. I'd always have somebody, professional running the event, but all I did was put it together, and it was so popular. So again, maybe we can support that and give those experiences that a lot of people just don't have. And one of the reasons they don't have it is school that no longer connects that dot. It's much more about just getting through the education, which is outdated, but let's not go there today.
Different podcast, Peter, different podcast.
Exactly. How do we do that? And that, coming back to sport, coaches do that. They give you the experience of life in ways that you've not experienced. With my kids, it was we did as many things as possible until they were about 10. And then typically they wanted to go down a route of something that they were particularly good at. And those coaches made a massive difference, a difference that I couldn't make for my own children. So as parents, connecting the dots to make sure your child has a good experience will serve them better in later life.
Diversity of experiences, and that goes back to diversity of thought, and diversity of backgrounds also helps, just makes the conversation broad, and that's what I think brings more of those opportunities to the table. Now, Peter, that's something I didn't know about you, that easily led. That's very interesting. That's not on your LinkedIn, by the way, in case you wanted to update your LinkedIn. I like that one. I may have to rob that name. I hope you didn't trademark it. I like that idea. Because you're right. I mean, sometimes just getting outside of our norm and our comfort allows us, the mentality and the space to grow emotionally as well as physically, as well as, in the intellectual side of our brain going, what am I going to do? What's important for next Monday? I only have 4,000 Mondays left. What am I going to do with them?
What do I do? You're highlighting the whole benefit too of like a change of scenery. When you travel, everything's new. That's why corporate retreats are so effective when you do it offsite. You could have an incredibly different experience if you just go to a different environment than your boardroom, by having a different conversation. The same conversation could be had in both places and the outcome will be vastly different. We know this because we shake it up a little bit. We need that newness and novelty that sparks different parts of our brains in more effective ways.
Yeah, I love it. Jodi, when you look back at your career and looking at the people that are listening to this as well as are watching your career and going, wow, like you've done so much from where you started to where you are today. What are the lessons that you can share? So somebody who's young in their career is able to go, I'm going to be aware of what the lessons were and hopefully avoid them or learn from them without having to have the pitfalls and experience pitfalls. What are those lessons?
Yeah. Well, I think that I will begin with just saying I came into the fitness industry as an outsider. So I was not a sporty gal. I was insecure, not an athlete, never participated. I was too self-conscious. So for me, getting into fitness for me was always my safe place because it was this independent thing, right? You could just go and do the Stairmaster or go do the step class back in the days, and then you get a good workout. But I didn't have to worry about being an inadequate volleyball player, for example. And of course, if I could go back, I would totally try out for those teams as a child and become, benefit in the ways you've both spoken about how sport can be advantageous. So I would just say, I got into fitness and I moved into the fitness industry and became a leader there in ways that one would not say that it was a type, quote unquote, like it was not part of a obvious connection of dots. And I love that because what it means is that it's not a lesson about fake it till you make it. But it is a lesson about how if you are curious about something, it's sort of like a go for it anyways. It doesn't matter if it's not this natural identity for you. Same thing with leadership. I think a lot of people are reluctant, especially women, to get into leadership because they're not qualified or they haven't had all the training. Well, like as we've discussed, there ain't no training. Like you're not going to get it. You just have to learn on the job and maybe get a good coach. But so it's kind of like this idea about going for it. And then the whole philosophy that drives me is life is short. And so what are we waiting for? Every time I'm reluctant to make a change, just because I am chicken. I mean, I am succumb to fear all the time, and I have to override it daily to say, oh, come on. Like, I'm dying. What am I worried? Like, who cares? What am I worried about if I go and do this thing? Like, what am I going to fail? Who cares? I'm going to die anyways. So it's about just going for it. Don't worry about not being the right fit or perfectly qualified today. You'll figure, like, just go for it. Be bold. That's my thing. Just be bold.
I love the way you come from a different angle of it. We spend so much time, and I'm a love-hate relationship with social media, and everyone's having a great life, and I'm like, it couldn't be. Like, that's just not normal life. I see a 90 seconds clip, and I'm this person's life is. I'm like, no, 90 seconds might have been great, but
right.
So I love the way you're coming from the other angle, going, we only have so many of days. We're all going in one direction. We're all leaving in the same way. Enjoy it but make the most of it. So it's definitely a nice way you're coming from it. I appreciate it, and it does align with the whole Irish way of looking at it as well. Peter, with your career and all you've done as well, what are the lessons for, again, for somebody looking at you and yourself going, I definitely want to follow the path and, achieve the same. What are the lessons that you would like to share?
It's a really good question and a difficult one to answer, but it's similar to Jodi. What I would say is, look, there's a number of step changes in life. And if you never try something, you'll never get up that step. And the reality is that getting up the step is hard, but once you're there, it's easy. It's just status quo. It's normal. You're in a new position and really should be thinking about the next step, right? And you just gotta try it. You got to go with it and, find out where the gaps are in your personality that you need to solve, maybe, and then spend some time getting great at it and then take the next step. Never be afraid of speaking out in public and putting yourself in a position where you're saying what you have to say and giving people the opportunity to talk back to you and learn from it, or say, actually, that's I just don't believe that. I think you've got that right or wrong, but that's okay. That's all part of learning. And then the last piece is experience, right? Just you gotta go with those experiences. I got two things to say there. One is that I think I'm probably coming towards the end of my sporting career. I'm a pro-am fleet sailor at the moment, national champion last year, and the body it takes me a while to get back and ready for the next event. I don't actually know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to need to do something because I can't just work. So that experience is a need for me, and I need to really dig in and think about it and spend some time on it. And maybe that's something that our health club brands can really help with. Is be really experiential. Like the Easily Led Club, come and try out these 10 different things, see if anything triggers. If it does, great, we'll help you to the next step. And may or may not be inside the facility, but as a brand, think of me as a brand of choice, not a place of choice, right? Someone who can.
I think what's interesting there, you've both been very strong on go do it, like stretch yourself, get out of the comfort zone, pick something that you don't know about or don't feel comfortable doing, go for it anyway. And we definitely, and I know, Jodi, we look at the research and we're not as good at that as women. We have different reasons that we aren't as good at that. And the stats would say we don't apply for the roles, unless we feel like we're 90% qualified. So we got to stop that. We got to just go for it. As you said, go for it, try it. Worst case scenario, you get experience of an interview or experience of feedbacks from somebody who's more experienced in that space. So throw in the CV, go for the application, go for the job, go do the whatever skydiving or whatever, and then you said pick up something new, stretch yourself with it. I feel like Peter's going to be joining Dave Wright on paddle next year. I feel like paddle is going is possibly in your future if I'm to foresee. Definitely
We'll
possible.
see.
But I think that's what's really important there for both, which is really the dots there. I think the can takeaway here is go for it. Put yourself out there, be uncomfortable, stretch, get out of the comfort zone. And the more we do that, the more we can learn. No, worst case scenario. And I think because of the world that we're in today, it's okay to go try something. And even if you don't succeed, whatever the definition of success is, you learn, you grow, you build something, and then you go in a different direction. That's just the world that we're in. We're not in 40-year jobs anymore. We're in much shorter potential projects or fractionals or roles that are 2-3 years and so on. So it allows us that flexibility to try it. And we just all need to get more comfortable with doing that.
And I think actually, that leads us to the second piece of advice that I would say, right? Now you've got that confidence, be disruptive. So knowing that industry is being disrupted, find that disruptive strength in you, something that you represent, that you are experienced in, that have maybe delivered in the past, but certainly have a passion for change within that environment, and introduce that to the organization that you want to work for or that you do work for. And that's how you stand out in the crowd, regardless of what gender or segment that you're within. And I think for females, just trusting what that representation looks like is a way to disrupt, because ultimately we have to disrupt the boardroom if we're going to be more balanced and we're going to see the growth that has been experienced. So be disruptive and feel confident in that.
Yeah, I'm going to have loads of great conversations around menopause and hormones and and all that good stuff, which is going to be uncomfortable for both parties, I have no doubt. But also looking at likewise empathy and emotional intelligence and diversity of thought and experience. So yeah, we're going to have those conversations in order to disrupt and get balance. That is different from today, and hopefully serves a better audience. As we mentioned in the very start here, we all want a more healthier, active world. Across emotional, physical, mental, and so on, and health. So we have to, disrupt to get there, because right now the numbers are not good, right? We're not where we need to be. So hopefully we'll be in a much better place, and again, disruption will help get us there. Guys, before we wrap up, because I appreciate that this has been fantastic, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully the audience have as well. But you guys are, I said, very accomplished leaders in your space. And the one question I have for every guest is, let us spotlight or call out somebody else who may not be as visible and may not be as well known as yourselves. Who are the leaders that we should be aware of, and hopefully that can go connect with and find out what they're doing, and also amplify what they're doing to disrupt and benefit the world. So maybe Jodi, over to you first. Who is the person that you want to spotlight?
Yeah, I'm happy to shine the light on Eris Singleton. She is the CEO of TGIN, so thank God it's natural, based out of Chicago. And she inherited the company after her aunt passed away at 42 of breast cancer. Christia Donaldson founded the company. And Eris has done more than just a job of taking a baton and somehow keeping it going. And she's risen to the challenge. Company's growing, and she's a great mentor, and she's starting a whole kind of sort of side brand of mentoring other entrepreneurs, especially women who are trying to start their things. So I think she's just dynamite, doing such really inspiring things.
Love it. Great shout out. And yeah, tough baton to pick up, but sounds like she's absolutely crushing it. Love it. Well done. Thank you. That's a brilliant shout out. Peter, how about your side? Can you spotlight?
Yeah, I got two, and it's a little bit nepotistic, so I apologize.
That's okay.
I apologize for that. But two people that influence me on a daily basis are Claire, my wife, who's an embodiment coach, a life coach, and a light leader, and she just constantly every day teaches me to think about things differently. Thinks about what I'm feeling and thinks about what I'm seeing, and we coach each other at the weekend every weekend. So shout out to Claire. And the second is Ella. So my eldest daughter, who, she's a coach, she's a marketing strategist. She set up her own business as an online business manager, and has just grown that really, really well. And it's just super impressive for me that she's taking everything she's learned in her life, the experience from work, from sport, and she's just doing it. And clearly I'm biased, and I absolutely accept that, but shout out to her, because I think she's a bit of a guiding light for her generation.
Love it. And you didn't have to leave the house to get those. I love it.
There you go.
What's really interesting there, Peter, and it is very warming, that I know we did a recent podcast with Shahara and Mark around, and again, the Gottman Institute data around that partnership. One of the biggest career moves you can make is a partner. That's a partner, right? And to your point, like you said, you coach every weekend. Again, going into our lives, our personal and professional, there's an overlap with us, because again, we have to be fulfilled, and we're talking about being meaningful, right? So it's such a massive part of it. So thank you, Peter, because it's a pleasure. And I know you're a man in a house of women, so thank God you didn't have to go too far either. But it is fantastic to see it, and I think we're definitely in that transition where we're appreciative of our partnerships, and we're appreciative of go try it and do it. So your daughter sounds like a phenomenal woman so far. So I'm looking forward to meeting her. I don't think I've met your daughter. I'm sure I've met your wife, but I don't think I've met your daughter. So I'm looking forward to meeting her and hopefully supporting where we can, because a rising tide raises all boats. And I think we're at a time where we're all trying to lift each other up, so we get disruptive and we get to a world that's much more, healthier and active and connected and supportive. And that's the world definitely that I want to live in. So happy to do so. So guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully all of our listeners have also learned a lot, because there's some really key messages in there. But here's to the future and disrupting it and making sure that we are stretching ourselves and pushing the boundaries and appreciating life, because we're all going to die someday.
What a cap off.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Really appreciate it. Great to see you.
thank you for listening. You can connect the dots with others by sharing this podcast with colleagues and teammates. At wearethecollective.world, you can join a professional network, avail of professional development, and engage your support team. We collaborate on the shared pursuit for gender balance in health and business. Until next time, keep connecting the dots.